heroes. Hey, this is Mel from howtoplayguitars.com. Today I'm going to give you another tutorial. This time it's going to be on how to play your guitar chords more cleaner or cleanly. Stay tuned. Hey guitar heroes, if you like this video, make sure you smash that like button and make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I hope that you enjoy this video and let me know down in the comments what you think, what your thoughts are about what I talked about today. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Bye for now. Okay, welcome back. So if you've ever tried to play a chord on the guitar and the notes just didn't come out very clean, like let's say you're trying to play, let's say you're trying to play an F chord. All right, now an F chord is often a very difficult chord, okay? But if you're trying to play an F chord and you know some of your notes just don't come out, right? Now I see this all the time in students that I work with on an individual basis, both virtually and in person. It's a very common problem, not just on the F chord, but even on the C chord. Sometimes they just can't get some of those notes to come out, right? It should sound like that, right? Where all the notes come out, you hear it, they all sound in tune, everything is coming out clearly, you know, and you know, if you have a musical ear, you can instantly tell, oh yeah, that's a C chord, right? Or if I play a G chord, or if I play a D chord. Now, some of these chords, like the D chord, isn't necessarily a very difficult chord, although sometimes what I find is students have a hard time getting this note, the F sharp note, to come out, right? They get like, and they just can't get that note to come out, and it's a matter of, well, what is your third finger doing? Because they think it's the second finger. Now, it may be the second finger is too close to the fret. So really what I teach students is each finger needs to be next to the fret, but not on it. Not necessarily directly in the middle, but just a little closer to the fret. Like in this case, like if I'm going to play a C note, 3rd fret on the A string, okay, I don't want it way over here because then it's going to be buzzy and it's not going to come out very well. So as I move it over a little bit, I start to get that note to come out better. And then once I get that note, then I try to put my second finger on the D string for the E note. And then I have the open G and then the first finger for the C. Now, inevitably, when somebody's trying to play this chord, one of those notes just doesn't come out. It's often the E note here because the 3rd finger lays on top of the D string because they're just not playing on the tip of the finger, right? Okay, or the G string gets blocked, or both happens. Or they can't quite reach down to grab that C note on the D string here. To alleviate that problem, there's lots of things you can do. There's one main thing that's very important. Now, I saw somebody else teach on this, and just for the record, I'm a big fan of this guy. I've watched his videos for years. I've bought his books. I've read his books. I've learned a lot from this guy myself. As a guitar teacher, I've probably even used some of his ideas in my teaching, so I have much respect for him. But the one thing that he said I just didn't agree with, and I'm not going to give any names, so don't ask. He said to start out like this, and personally, I just don't agree with that, and that's okay. We can have different ways of doing things. But for me, what I've always taught my students is to cup the fingers like this. It's kind of like what I teach my students is to imagine you're holding a bottle or a cup in your hands. You know, so like if I grab this water bottle right here, right? All right, now it's a little big. It's a little bigger than perhaps the ideal. But the idea is you're cupping your hand like you're holding something, okay? So if I'm trying to hold something like a cup or a bottle, my hand is going to be sort of in this position, okay? My thumb is more or less going to be lined up either with my first finger or my second finger, okay? Usually the second finger, but sometimes a little, almost in between sometimes too. Depends on your hand shape and the length of your fingers and all these other things. But you want it sort of in this ballpark, okay? What you don't want is you don't want your thumb over here, okay? And you don't necessarily always want your thumb over the top. Now, there are times that I do put my thumb over the top, okay? So when I was studying Jimi Hendrix's music, a lot of times, as I was trying to learn those chords that he was playing, right, I would wrap my thumb around the top, okay? But when I went and studied classical guitar at the university, you know, that was taught to us as a no-no. Never ever do that, okay? Now, also, keep in mind that a classical guitar neck is wider, which allows you to play more sophisticated music, more contrapuntal music, okay? A music where the lines are going in different directions and things like that, musically speaking, okay? Yeah, so anyway, so regardless, what I teach students is almost like a classical technique, not perfect classical technique necessarily for rock and pop music, but in the same vein of keeping the thumb most of the time behind the neck, at least when you're starting out and you're learning to play, at least for the first six months or first year or two. Try to keep the thumb on the back of the neck here, and then place the fingers on their tips, and like I've said already, next to the fret but not on the fret, just behind the fret. So third finger is just behind the third fret, second finger is just behind the second fret, first finger is just behind the first fret for a standard C major first position open C chord, right? Okay. And similarly, like if I play a G chord, okay, second finger here on the A string, third finger here on the E string, pinky up on the high E string, and notice that my third finger, very often what happens if people play this particular version of the G chord, and not everybody likes this shape, but what happens is the third finger hits the A string a little bit and blocks it. So you have to get right up on the tip of the finger. Okay, and I don't necessarily mean to say that they don't like the shape, but they don't like this fingering. Like most people play the G chord like this, right? Some people even play it like this with the pinky here. I teach a lot of students once they get this fingering and this fingering down to then go to the 4-finger version of the G chord, because then you can do lots of cool stuff, the G, C, D trick and things like that, right? Okay. Well, anyway, regardless. So the thing is, you really just want to keep the thumb behind the neck, pointing up more or less, lined up either with the first finger or the second finger or in between them a little bit. Play right on the tips of the fingers. Arch the fingers or bend the fingers at the knuckles. You know, at each of these knuckles, bend at those knuckles. Don't bend the wrist, right? Because what happens when you bend the wrist, it restricts your movement this way. And if you bend the wrist this way, it restricts your movement that way. It's just not, and it's actually, you can actually cause carpal tunnel, okay? And so you don't want that. So you want to bend more at the fingers than at the wrist, okay? Now, I'm just going to go through some chords. We've already seen them, like C and G and D and E. E is a pretty easy chord to get for beginners right away, but you still have to be able to play on the tip. What I find sometimes is when people are playing this chord, sometimes they block that G string or the B string just a little bit, and they may not even realize it, because when you play the chord, you hear all the notes that you really need, right? But sometimes you block a string in there, so you really want it to be on the tips of the fingers, even for that one, especially if you're going to do like an E7 with the pinky here, okay? Let me show you another trick to help you learn how to play on the tips of the fingers. If you go up to about the 5th fret, so you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Usually it's the second dot. On some guitars, it's the first dot, like a Yamaha, I think. The dot actually starts at the 5th fret. But so anyway, you can start the 5th fret. Count up the 5 frets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Start there on the G string. Place your fingers on the G string, one finger at a time. First finger on the 5th fret. Second finger on the 6th fret. Third finger on the 7th fret. Pinky on the 8th fret. Okay, line them up like this. Make sure your thumb is on the back of the neck, okay? And don't bend your wrist like that. I'm just holding it weird to sort of show you, you know. But don't bend your wrist like this or don't bend your wrist like this. Keep it straight, okay? And place your fingers like that, okay? That's a pretty good starting point for good technique, okay? Now, you don't want to start too high necessarily, because the frets are really close together and it's not going to give you a good idea of the distances between the frets that you need for a lot of your playing on the guitar. And down here, now eventually you can move it down here, right? But down here there's a little bit more of a stretch, and the wrist wants to bend there more typically, okay? To alleviate that, you always want to try to keep the neck at a angle, 30 to 45 degrees, pointing up a little bit. This is more of a traditional sitting position, more of a classical position then would be like this, okay, and on the left knee, okay? And so you want to place your fingers like that, And then once you get them there, you can do that in all the strings, okay? And this, I'll do this more in depth in a later video that I'm planning to do on guitar warm-ups. We'll get more into depth into that exercise later. And I'm sure you've seen it before. Some people call it the spider exercise, or like almost like a chromatic exercise, although it's not fully chromatic. Anyway, we'll get into that later. But what you can do is when you play on any of these strings, you can play right on the tips of the fingers and test one string at a time whether those notes are coming out underneath. So what I'm doing is I'm picking like the D string 5th fret, okay, with my first, and I got my first finger there, and then I'm playing the G string underneath that. And then I'm playing my second finger on the 6th fret of the same string, doing the same thing. Now it doesn't always sound good. It's a little bit of dissonance, but that's okay. Embrace the dissonance. It's not going to hurt you. Okay, 3rd finger on the 7th fret, and then pinky is the toughest one. That's the one that's going to kill. That's the one that's going to be really difficult to do. Okay, but can you get those notes to come out? And you do that in all the strings. Found this exercise while studying classical guitar and playing a Bach piece, a Bach cello suite. I think originally it's in G, but the version I was playing it was in D to fit it on the guitar a little bit better. And there was a passage where I literally had to climb the strings like that and play the open string with it. Okay, and I struggle with that so much because I just couldn't get my finger in that perfect position. So I really had to work on that. And it's something even now that I work on almost like in a daily way as a warm-up. Again, we'll get to that later. All right, another thing you can do in this position, okay, and again, this is another warm-up. We'll come back, we'll get more in depth into this later. But with each finger, I can leave these fingers down. Okay, notice that I already did that. And then I can move one finger at a time. So maybe I move my first finger to the A string. Okay, now finger style, this works best with finger style, though you can do it with a pick too. It's good for string skipping practice. But, so all my fingers are on there. I'm just gonna move the first finger and then move it to the B string. And try not to move the other fingers, okay? And then down to the low E and then the high E also, okay? You can do that with each of your fingers. This is a great independence exercise, a great warm-up, but also is teaching you to play on the tips of the fingers and make sure those notes are coming out clear. Okay? And do the same thing with the pinky. The pinky is the one, like I said, though, that's the one that kills. That's one that it's hard for most people because the pinky is the weakest finger. But if you get each of your fingers equally strong, then you'll be able to play those nice sounding chords with all the notes sounding nice and clean. One more thing that I want to talk about real quick here. Maybe two, but one more thing primarily is bar chords. Okay, when you're playing a bar chord, same idea. If I play an F bar chord, talked about that briefly already. Okay, thumb on the back of the neck. And actually what I tell people with bar chords, the best practice, honestly, is really to try to line up that thumb with the second finger as much as possible. But like I said, there's a little bit of variance there with some people, but try to get it right as much over that. Like I tell people to imagine there's a hole in the neck. Right now, don't drill a hole in the neck. That'd be really bad. Don't do that. Okay, but so there's a hole in the neck, and you wanted to touch your thumb to your second finger, like that. Okay, that's what you're aiming for. Okay, and then place the other fingers around that. Again, I have a video on this you can watch. I'll put a link in the description or up in the video here. But you know. You can, I mean, most people struggle with the F bar chord or any bar chord because they're learning how to like bar all those strings, right? Right. But really what it is, it's not just that. It's a big part of it. And I have an exercise that I work people through. It's also making sure all the fingers are equally strong so they all hold their own weight, so they all can hold down the notes in that chord and get them to come out cleanly, okay? Now, if you can't play an open C chord clean, you're probably not going to be able to play an F chord clean until you can get the C chord down first, okay? Just as a quick disclaimer there, all right? Same thing with like a B flat chord, okay? You know, or the B or anything, you can move that up, right, chromatically, and you can get different chords, okay? But the B flat chord is difficult for people. Now, the classical way of doing it is like this. The toughest note always is the highest note, the E string, and sometimes the B string. Okay, and getting that stretch between the first finger and the second finger, but also like this, right? Sort of like the Eric Clapton shape, right? You know, the cocaine, that kind of thing, right? Eric Clapton was known for doing this kind of technique, where he's just using the first finger and the third finger to bar, and it almost, people would joke that it was like he was like flipping people off, you know. He's just playing guitar, man. So anyway, but look, so you want to really work on trying to get all those notes to come out clean. That one's tricky if you lay that third finger flat, because really you have to bend it backwards, and almost like, it almost has to be like double jointed or something, but okay. All right, so work on that. And then one final thing, here's a bonus. If you stay with me this long, you are a pro, and I can't wait to see what you're gonna do with this information. One last thing, we talked about the classical side of things. Okay, the jazz side of things, like I said, this is a bonus. If you hung with me this long, you're awesome. Watch this. So here's a way to get some cool jazz chords, okay? And I'm not going to go into what they are now. I'll come back to that in a later video. But if you take your first finger and place it anywhere on the D string, for instance, okay, let's say I'll put it on the second fret of the D string. Then I put the second finger on the third fret of the G string, third finger on the fourth fret of the B string, pinky on the fifth fret of the high E string. So you should get 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of fret numbers from the D string down to the high A string, okay? And by the way, this is a C sharp 913 without the root. We'll get into that stuff later, okay? So now, once you got this shape, okay, up on the tips of the fingers, not bending your wrist too much. You're gonna have to bend it a little bit, but not too much. Just try to swap a couple fingers, like let's say the second and third fingers. Well, that's a prettier sounding chord, though, right? Yeah, that's like a C6-9 without the root again, okay? And then now move the fingers like this. G major 7, look at that. By leaving these two fingers, see, I had them like this, and I moved the second and third fingers, and then moved the other fingers around it, okay? And then you can do that on all the strings, okay? This is a really funky chord. It's like a B diminished with an add 11 there. Anyway, so then you can move some fingers around, okay? So I'm gonna move this, okay, and then move this, okay? You know what I mean? So like a D major 7 augmented chord. So anyway, so play around with that. You can do it on all sets of strings. There's 3 sets of 4 strings: the D, G, B, E, the A, D, G, B, and the E, A, D, G strings. Practice that on each of those strings. That's an amazing exercise that's sure to strengthen your fingers, hurt a little bit as you work on the muscles in your hand and strengthen them, working on all those different things, playing on the tips of the fingers, trying to keep the wrists straight, which is hard to do in some of these chords, I'm just going to be honest, but you're trying to move the fingers minimally, all these things. So, all right, so there's some exercises for you. So number 1, put your hand in this cup position, bring it up to the neck, put your fingers on, play the chord, make sure it sounds clean, okay? Number 2, make sure you play on the tips of the fingers, all right? Number 3, make sure the thumb is on the back of the neck, pointing up, more or less, not sideways, not over. That's a whole other thing. We're not going to get into that right now, but let's try to aim for that, all right? And number 4, just making sure that you're next to the frets. You're not like too far to the other fret. You know, you're pushing towards the fret that you should be on. Like in this case, my pinky should be on the 5th fret. It should be just behind, but not touching the 5th fret. All right? All right. So thanks for hanging with me this long. If you got this far, like I said, you're amazing if you did. If you didn't, you can come back and watch it later. One of my things I think I would like to do with this video is actually make chapters so you can kind of go through it and pick out the parts that you really want to work on. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm going to have more videos coming out soon. I've taken a little bit of a hiatus, just busy with other teaching that I was doing, but now, the summertime, I'm going to try to hit this thing hard and try to drop some videos here as often as possible. At least once a week. Keep me accountable to that, once a week. All right. So anyway, this is Mel from howtoplayguitars.com, and I look forward to helping you to play guitar better. And as an extra challenge, see if you can tell me what this chord is that I played in my thumbnail. Bye for now.